grab your loved ones, or grab your love partner. And if you're by yourself, no worries. Just follow after me. Gonna do the two-step and cowboy boogie. Grab a sweetheart and spin her with them. Do the hold down and get into it. Take it to the left now and dip with it. Don't throw down, take a sip with it. Now lean back, put your hips in it. Let's have some fun. To the left now. To the right. Now take your left hand and put it on your side. Gonna roll your shoulders. Do the slip and slide.
What's up, folks? Y'all already know who I am. Come on.
Gonna do the two-step.
Make sure you tell your friends. Come on. Day 4. Where your friends at? Happy Thursday. What's that, Friday Junior? It's Friday Junior, folks, and we are here. We are here for day 4. Day 4 of Who Can Guess It? The Brothers Obtaining and Navigating Dynamic Solidarity, Bonds, Trans Men and Transmasculine Week of Affirmation and Resilience. Come on, we're going to take a little bit of time to let you get in your seats, let you get home to your laptops, call your friends and tell them to come on in, because today we're talking about strengthening allyship. Come on. Y'all know I don't own these rights. I'm only playing about 3 seconds because Beyonce and them ain't shutting us down. I can't believe it made it. That's enough, because they might tell us off for real. Where you at? Let me see where you are. If you're here, let us know. Let us know. I go by the name of T. Pearson. Don't touch my truck. We don't own these rights. This is Breland. Don't touch my truck. I'm the founder of the T. Pearson Experience. I'm here as one of your hosts today. I'm not your moderator, though. Oh, I'm going to bring them on in a little bit. We want to make sure you home and ready for this conversation first. Tell your friends. Tell your friends, come on. Come on. Make sure you follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and hit my website as well. Facebook, YouTube, we don't own these rights. Give me a thumbs up. Hold up. We got homework. We got this is called warm up. In school, they call it the warm up. So in 20 words or less, we want to know what's your thoughts on strengthening allyship. Drop it right down here. Drop it in the comments because we can see it. And in the meantime, let's vibe about it more. I'm waiting to see what you say. I'm going to save my opinion till I come back later. Come on. We are here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Day number 4 of the Brothers Obtaining and Navigating Dynamic Solidarity, Trans Men and Transmasculine Week of Affirmation and Resilience, 2021. We welcome you all into this place. We thank you for coming and joining us for day 4, session number 1. Okay, session number 1, strengthening allyship. We have a wonderful panel for you today. This panel was brought together to give insight on ways that non-transgender communities can have better methods of allyship with the transgender community. We are really excited about this week. It is the inaugural week for trans men and transmasculine community for the Week of Affirmation and Resilience 2021. This uplifting week was brought to you by so many sponsors. Let me make sure I put them up here so that you all can see them. We thank all of our sponsors for all that they have brought to us. The Student Center for Equity and Inclusion, the IG LGBTQ Campus Life at the University of Richmond, Black Trans Fund, Flux Project, Diversity Richmond, and Nations Foundation. We thank you all for your sponsorship this week for the inaugural week of Trans Men and Transmasculine Community. I would like to bring on our moderator right now so we can get this program started. Make sure you share this feed with your crew. And right now we got a song from one of our panelists. a surprise panelist. Listen, and let me tell you something. I'm about to download all of his music. You hear me? Y'all better find it too. Let me take this off because we own these rights. Well, I don't. He do. 2 a.m. Ricky, baby. Also with CC Peniston. Y'all better get into it.
Tell me what you want, right? Know your eyes got a glow, right? The middle don't turn me on side. And if you with it, we can roll.
Oh, this is rocking.
You know I like it when your hips sway to the bass bone. Shimmy on my Jimmy till you feel the snake jump.
Okay.
On the liquor or you taking good puffs.
Okay.
Feeling or you seeking real love.
We still waiting to hear from you. We still waiting to hear from you.
My general nature. And if the liquor talking, can I wake and taste you?
Dezjorn, what's up with you?
Hey, what's going on? Hey.
Listen, I appreciate you letting me bring you on, you know what I'm saying, to highlight and to start this fourth conversation around allyship. So I'm going to go in the back because they always keep me all the fresh stuff in the back because I'm vegan today. So I'm going to go eat some lettuce and stuff. But if you need me, holler at me. Otherwise, I'll be back later.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, T. That was hype. I mean, I don't even know how to follow that. I mean, I've been doing this for a while, but that was like the best introduction. The energy is here, everybody. And as T said, I am Dezjorn Gauthier. I'm the CEO of Dezjorn International, and I am so proud and so happy to be here, a part of this panel and be moderating such a strong group. You are going to be amazed by what is going on. Let me tell you a little bit about myself while our panelists get ready before they come on screen. So like I said, I'm the CEO of Dezjorn International, and I have one of the largest leading trans organizations in this nation right now. And with that being said, I have about 14 brands. I counted last night, actually, as I was writing everything down. That's from talent management to a construction company to a security company to Black Tea Magazine, one of the world's first quarterly magazines, to a whole bunch of other stuff. There's a ministry department. There's a nonprofit wing. I got so much going on. And the reason for that is because I want to create space for you, for my trans and gender nonconforming brothers and sisters that are out there. And that is what I do. I have a firm that is built on multiple subsidiaries. And on top of that, I'm also a professional model. That's usually where a lot of people have seen me from being in Vogue, Vanity Fair, modeling for Barney's New York, a lot of our local trans organizations as well. And so that is who I am. I'm slowly but surely moving into retirement. So I haven't been as much on social media and active as I have been in the past. But don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. My advocacy work will always, always, always be something that I do, no matter how old I get. I'm not that old, but I will tell you, I've been taking a little bit more time for my family because I am a husband and a father of 5 beautiful girls. And it's home time, we're at home, we're being virtual, and that's what we're doing. So with that being said, I want to make sure that you all are following Bonds. Okay, so please make sure that you are. And also, we are using StreamYard, and we are streaming across Facebook and YouTube simultaneously. So we're doing this at the same time. We are on these platforms. Share, please share. We want as many people as possible to be viewing this, because like I said, this is going to be a really, really strong panel. And this is going to be awesome of what we're going to be talking about. I got some awesome questions, and I'm telling you, y'all are not ready. Y'all are not ready. I am so hyped to be moderating this panel. Don't forget about the Black Trans Joy Brunch DC on November 21st, 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. I'm assuming that's in DC time. I'm over here in Central Time Zone. So for me, that's going to be a different time. But that is the time. And there's going to be some links, I'm sure, that are dropping. There it is. I was going to say it's going to be coming. So make sure you follow and click the links that you need. Get those tickets. Brunch and mimosas sound real good. I might have to fly in is all I'm saying. I might have to come in because that's something that I've been waiting for sure. I'm going to go ahead and get ready to bring up our panelists. We have some awesome panelists, like I had said, and they're going to introduce themselves as soon as we get them up here, or maybe we're doing it one by one. Okay, here we go. We got 2 a.m. Ricky. Hey, what's going on? How are you?
You.
Awesome.
I'm doing well,
awesome.
man. Thanks y'all for having me. So I go by the name of 2 a.m. Ricky. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm a recording artist. I'm a rapper. I'm a songwriter. I'm an actor and model. So most of y'all either heard my music or seen my face because I released a single with CeCe Peniston that actually went #1 on the LGBT urban chart. So fun fact, I'm the first Black trans man to ever chart any music chart. On top of that, I'm also CEO of Pure Destiny, which is a PR and marketing firm here based in Atlanta, where I focus on developing talent and marketing with artists who may be signed, but also helping with diversity and inclusion within the entertainment industry.
Wow, amazing, amazing. See, now I'm even more honored to have my intro music to be by 2 a.m. Ricky. Man, period. I'm about to go ahead and download some music. I'm telling you, I told y'all, y'all are not ready. Y'all are not ready. And next we have Jess Cook, Reverend Jess Cook.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm the Reverend Jess Cook. My pronouns are they, them. And I am a minister in the Presbyterian Church, actually. And I was the first openly non-binary person ordained in the Presbyterian Church. Identify as trans non-binary. And I am actually in the process of starting a new worshiping community here in Richmond that is going to be kind of focused around embodied reconciliation. So like within ourselves, within our communities, but I'm partnering with a good friend and here in Richmond, a guy named Charles Bowling. And we're, starting something that's going to be queer, sort of led and focused and embodied, and part of it, a whole lot of new stuff, including a cannabis ministry actually is part of it. So so that's what we're doing in Richmond right now. Yeah.
Amazing work that is, and I'm so proud to hear that. And I will be for sure to have my ministry department, follow along of what's going on your spiritual journey and so forth. So again, that's amazing to hear. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Next, we have Mark Kornmann.
Hey, Dezjorn, how are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
I'm going to break the mold. I'm not a model, as you can see, so I'm going to break the mold a little bit tonight, but I'm glad to be here tonight for this panel. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm the National Strategy and Partnership Director for the National Trans Visibility March. I've been at the march for the last 3 years. I do work in Orlando, Florida, also Joy Metropolitan Community Church, one of the openly gay metropolitan community churches in Florida, and on the board there and working in the community. Prior to that, I was at the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. My background is education and also fundraising and working with nonprofits. So I do a lot of work in the nonprofit space. And just excited to be here tonight, celebrating with all of you and having this discussion. So thanks, Dezjorn.
Absolutely. Wow, that's amazing what all you do. So thank you so much for that. And the nonprofit world is one world to navigate. So you're doing an amazing job being able to navigate that. So thank you for that. And then of course we have Ely.
Hey, how are y'all? I'm Ely Dyer the Fourth. I use the pronouns he, him, his. You usually see me in my Bonds hat as a co-founder and director of development for Bonds, but tonight I'm wearing my other hat as the associate director for LGBTQ Campus Life at the University of Richmond. So glad to be here and glad to be on this panel with so many great panelists.
Thank you for that. And thank you for being one of those founders for Bonds, because we all wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for you and your staff and everything that you do. So thank you so much. We also do have Queen Victoria, who is in flight actually and going to be coming in. And hopefully, if Queen can join us, awesome. And we'll give her an opportunity to be able to introduce themselves. But if not, this is who your panel is. This is how we're going to be rocking tonight. So thank you all for your time, and let's dive right on in. Are y'all ready?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So the first question is, what are some ways that you have experienced allyship in the community? Experience or witness. Now, a lot of us, have our own organizations here. Where have you experienced that allyship? And any of you can go ahead and go first. Really, now I'm at the pick on people. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I'll give you some examples of good allyship and bad allyship. I think some of the best allyship that I have seen are from organizations that we partner here in Richmond, such as like Diversity Richmond, Side by Side, the Nations Foundation, which is also a trans-led organization. But what I look for when I look for good allyship is, that actually center trans identity, experience, and then also put their money where their mouth is. Because it's one thing to say, like, I want to bring trans people into a space, right? But what does your staff look like? Is your staff reflective of the trans identity? Are you doing active listening to your trans population that you're trying to serve? And then also, too, when you're bringing trans people in for ideas and to see what the community wants, are you throwing a pizza party, or are you actually paying people stipends and wages? So those would be some examples that I've seen of like good allyship. Those examples of bad allyships, and I won't call those organizations out. I've been those organizations where, they say they do trans-oriented work and there's no trans people involved, and decisions are made about trans people without the input of trans people.
Absolutely. Now, Mark, you work in the nonprofit world. Where have you, or when, if you have, seen allyship failed in that nonprofit wing?
Well, I think Lee talked on a couple of these points. I think, first of all, not including the trans and non-binary community in the very beginning and in the discussions is where I see nonprofits fail. And I think the other thing is that a lot of nonprofits come in and say, well, this is what we think you need to do. And part of it is, and Lee mentioned this, is listening. It's about what does the trans experience look like, and how is it that your organization can partner with them to help that experience, to be a part of that experience. But I think one of the failures that I see is a lot of times organizations and allies are saying, here's what I think you need to do, without listening first. And that's just, I think, key to it. You have to listen first to see what's happening, what's in the landscape, what are they experiencing. And I think one of the things you talked about is you can't be redirecting dollars. And that happens a lot of times in the nonprofit world. You see when they're working with the trans community, they start redirecting dollars. And dollars, as we all know it in nonprofits, are scarce. And that's one of, I think, the major mistakes that nonprofits make when they're partnering with people. You just can't do that. So that's where I would say I've seen successes and failures. And I think, as Lee said, I think you have to look at your team. And if your team doesn't represent who you're trying to partner with, then you've got a mistake from the very beginning.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Go ahead, Reverend.
So I kind of failed to mention this. I've been so deep in working on the new stuff, new church stuff, that for the last decade, I've worked in small nonprofits. So first for an organization in Richmond called Side by Side, where I was the youth programs director for 4 years, and also an intern before that in seminary. And then most recently for an organization called More Light Presbyterians, working with within the church and faith communities around queer organization, organizing, education, a lot of that stuff. So for me, when I look at it, it's like there's this experience where nonprofits a lot of times will like reduce somebody to their identity, right? Where it's like they're so set on having like a trans person that like they miss this whole other part and like of their lived experience. And I think in that, I think that's where so for me in the church too, right? You have conversations around tokenism and how that plays in. And it's the same kind of thing that I think happens a lot of times in nonprofits and in life, like I know for me, like it's a real different experience if I'm in relationship with somebody and it's clear that they want to know about my identity because they want to know more about me, versus when you meet people and like they want to know me because they want to know a trans person, right? And it's like it's revert, it's like, so for me, I think when allyship fails is when it's like leading with the like, I want to know a trans person, rather than like, oh, this is a person I know and this is part of their experience. I want to know more about this part of their experience, and it's like just getting two-dimensionalized in a way that you just sort of like, I think, and with trans men in particular, like with that dynamic, it's like, I think with any folks, it's like putting people who are more masculine or feminine into these into the same binary sort of like only way to exist spaces. You know, it's like we reduce ourselves to like the lowest form of who we are, you know, does that make sense? Like, rather than queering what it means to be masculine or to be a man, it's like we need to start fitting into this definition. And I think it's like it's the same thing. It's like then we can be the good kind of trans person, right? So that we're accepted and all that. But like, so yeah, it's just complicated, but definitely the overly reducing people to just this part of who they are. I see a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Everything that you're saying. 2 a.m. Ricky, do you see failure happening in the music industry with allyship?
It
Looks
like
like
broke as soon as I
looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties from you, 2 a.m. Ricky. So I'm gonna go ahead and
I'm
just move
sorry.
on to the next question here. So, Reverend, just because what you were speaking on and everything, what do you feel are some ways that allies can show up in a productive way for the trans masculine community?
Well, so for me, I mean, I feel like, so it's like look at how these systems affect you, right? Look at your own stuff in a way. I mean, in a way that like, I feel like if folks recognized the ways that like just how deep it is, like how deep these expectations are, that like it's I mean, I akin this. So for me as a white person, I'm also doing work around anti-racism, and I know my own anti-racism work pivoted when I started to realize like, oh shit, like this is about my freedom, right? It's not about me trying to like do the quote unquote right thing, but like these systems are burying me in a way. So like, I think for me, it was helpful to sort of pivot then, because then it's like, I'm not just trying to be a good white person, right? So I think it's like for non-trans folks, it's like, don't try to be the good cis person. Like just show up and like look at how these things impact you in a way, you know, like because it's deep. Like I have a almost 8-year-old kid who'll be 8 next week, who recently said that they want to use they them pronouns. And for me having this moment, it's like, oh, like I realize how deep it is, because I had a moment where it's like, well, are they sure? And it's like, what am I doing? Like I know how to do this, but like just realizing how deep those expectations are, I think is really important to notice. So for trans, I think allies, it's like, do your own work around how this impacts you, and also like speak out. It's like waiting for trans people to go and have to like continue to speak so that other people value our lives is exhausting. And it's like, it would be great if like non-trans allies were like, yes, I'm going to go actually show up and speak and put myself in these uncomfortable positions, because you shouldn't have to keep doing it. I think those are the things that come to mind for me.
Now, Ely, I would love to hear your response to this, especially having bonds and a lot of the organizations that I personally have seen you work one-on-one with and partner with throughout my time of knowing you. How would you say productive ways that allies can show to the trans masculine community?
So I think first and foremost is helping trans men and trans masculine folks be visible. I feel that we are like an invisible part of the spectrum. And I do recognize that this is something me and Tyree talk about all the time, like when we're in like Black pride spaces and like nobody interacts with us because the assumption is that we're cis men. And we understand that like you're now moving into this body where you have male privilege, and you think about a lot of folks in the community have had adverse experiences with cis men, and now you embody that. We get it. But there's still like, an adversity and a process that we go through. And so how I have experienced things where allies can show up better is, one, there are more than 6 trans guys, especially in the Black and brown community, that do this work. That was why when Tyree and I came up with the week and we picked the panelists, we wanted to pick people that people didn't see all the time, to show that there is a diversity of community and that there are more than one person doing the work. Also, too, a lot of times nonprofits versus then reaching out to trans men and trans masculine folks, the information is ran through trans women and trans femme people. Not saying that we're not there for our sisters, but the experience is totally different. Like there are some things that we experience the same, and there are some things that we experience on a totally different diaspora of the transgender experience. So start reaching out to us. And also too, allies have to be cognizant of the way that they play into the gatekeeping of politics, because not just trans communities of color, I feel like every community has gatekeepers. But there are some gatekeepers in, like, especially in the trans men, trans masculine communities, but funders and nonprofits reach out to those people all the time. And then the critique I always hear, well, this person was professional, they didn't have this and they didn't have that. But what are you doing to cultivate leaders and cultivate professionalism? Like, I own my privilege of being a person that's college educated and having degrees, but that doesn't keep me from reaching back to a brother that might not have that to give him some professional skills, And so, like, when I'm getting an email from American Expression or Leadership Cohort or anybody else that has a leadership cohort, I'm sending it out to everybody. And I have to tell folks all the time, stop sending it to me. I'm not the only Black trans man out here doing work that could speak, that could be on a panel, that could write a policy. So put your money into cultivating leaders. Actually do the reach out. And then also too, it can't just be a reach out when you want something. Like, I look at those funders and organizations that actually come and partake in events. Like, if you're asking, like, I need 5 trans people for a focus group and I ain't never seen you at any event or sitting on any panel or register for anything or reach out in any other way, I'm suspect of your actions. So just having that intentional reach out, really doing your research and really getting to know the community.
You saw me over here. I'm clapping, I'm snapping, I'm headbutting. I told y'all are not ready for the knowledge that you are about to receive from these panelists. I am telling you. Mark, I would love to hear from you. Again, with what all that you do, how can we have that trans masculine community and be productive? Oh, you're still muted, Mark.
Sorry about that. So I think one of the first things we have to understand is, what does it mean to show up? What is an organization? How do they define show up? Because organizations across the spectrum define show up differently. I do agree that I think one of the things that you have to do is you have to be out there and you have to be visible. If the only time you're showing up is when you need something, there's so much ground that you have to make up to get to that productive conversation. So I think it's important that you do show up. I do think, and I will say this from the perspective when I first joined the march, one of the mistakes I made was I didn't understand the players. And I narrowly defined the trans and non-binary community. And I feel like that was a mistake that I made. And as I grew into this position after the first year leading into the second year, it was then that I understood the many layers in the trans and non-binary community. And as Lee said, it can't be the same people every time showing up. You have to cultivate new people. If you look at the march, for example, in 2021, we diversified, went to Orlando, had marches in Sacramento, New York, Atlanta, and we had new faces, new voices at the table. Now, we still have work to do. We didn't have all the voices we needed. And Lee and folks know that. There are other voices that we needed to have at the table that we didn't. And so I just think in order to have a productive allyship and to know that you showed up, I think you have to look at, first of all, what does it mean to show up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, 2 a.m. Ricky, being in the music industry, which is a lot of times is viewed as heavily, cis male dominated, how can allyship show up and be productive for the trans masculine community?
It's kind of interesting that you say that. Honestly, a lot of you guys have touched on a lot. Education is key, for one. When I walk into spaces, I get the privilege, kind of like Lee touched on. I get a lot of privilege, right? Because I walk into a space and in their minds, they have no idea. You know what I'm saying? They have no idea that I'm trans. They have no idea that I'm not binary. They have no idea about my experience. But then I have to sit here and witness someone who may have, like we all said, be in a different layer, have a different type of path when it comes to their journey, get a whole nother type of treatment. So I constantly have these conversations in private rooms to help everybody understand that if key to being an ally is education. You need to know what you're trying to be a part of. You can't just want to support the trans community when it's Trans Awareness Week. You can't just want to support the trans community when it's Pride Month. But you also need to have a thorough understanding of who and what you're supporting. If you better understand the terminology, you better understand who we are in our lifestyles. You're no longer just using those of trans identity as profit. A lot of times these people, these organizations, these companies, these labels, they view us as product. We get pulled off a shelf when it's Pride Month. We get pulled off a shelf when they're talking about something in society that talks about us. Little Nas X had his run. All of a sudden, everybody was asking me every trans and gay person that I could think of to try to push. You know what I'm saying? We're not propaganda. We're not a trend. So I think that the key to an ally is being able to understand that this is normal and normalizing it for themselves. And then also, like Mark touched on, like Dyer touched on, is understanding the community near you. A lot of times they try to target, like, you know, those who they see in the media, those who they see as gatekeepers, those who they see as the head honchos. But every community is different. You know what I'm saying? There are very masculine trans men. There are very feminine trans men. There are people who are very fluid. You know what I'm saying? There are people from different backgrounds, different parts of their journey. Every one of us are different human beings, and they don't understand it. So you have to be able to understand the community within itself. You have to know what it's like to be non-binary. What does that mean? You have to know what being a feminine trans man is. What does that mean? You have to know what being a masculine trans man is. What does that mean? Because if you then understand what each means, you then understand how you can come in and help us, because each one of us have individual needs. And you can't be an ally without knowing that.
Absolutely. And all of you are just speaking such powerful words, and your expertise is just mind-blowing to me. This is one reason why I love moderating, because I myself learn a lot. I've been transitioning since 2014, so I'm still considered, like a baby trans. And I love things like this, and even something like this, helps me be able to go out and express ways to form allyship as well. So again, I want to thank you, from just being a moderator, and hearing the powerful words that each of you are speaking on this evening. But that leads me into my next question, which is, with your experience and your expertise, and you all being very involved in the communities that you associate yourselves with, explain why substantive allyship is needed versus performative allyship. So, Lee, if you want to go ahead and start that one off, if you would like, give everybody a little second to think, because that's kind of a deep one. That's a deep one.
Yeah. So I would say with substantive allyship versus the performative allyship, to me, performative allyship is dangerous. Because to me, that's how people get hurt. Right. So like, I'll give you an example. At the Virginia Department of Health, Ted Heck, he does a wonderful job of running a list of trans inclusive providers, access and services. Right. But part of his job is he has to thoroughly vet, all the folks that list themselves as being trans inclusive to prevent folks from having traumatic experiences. But to me, for a person to have to do that work for the whole state, in addition to the job he already has, I'm like, man, that's a lot of work, but has to do it because there are many times that folks promote themselves as being trans inclusive, and it's not an actually inclusive allyship, it's performative. So I give examples of Tyree and I have had many young guys reach out to us that utilize, different services. Let's say they say they're trans inclusive and they do HIV testing, right? But then they go into the testing center, and the folks that might work there haven't been trained. They're getting misgendered when they come in, or, going and heard that this was a resource for trans people in prep. And the person's like, oh, why do you need it? What you mean why I need it? I asked for it and go ahead and give it to me, right? And so then they're dealing with the trauma, already having gender dysphoria, already, maybe being in a place that wasn't the safest to be out and be trans, and taking the courage and the step to go out and access that service and then having a traumatic experience. So that performative allyship, where we just list that we're inclusive, we just list that we're ally without the training, without the knowledge and the education, that's when people get hurt. But when I think about, substantive allyship and how people like really do that work. So like I think about like here in the university system, you know, I know University of Richmond gets a lot of dings, but when it comes to my LGBTQ community and things that I need for my students, I don't have to chase behind folks to come to Safe Zone training or trans advocate training and get educated. When things happen on campus, I have not only LGBTQ professionals, but a lot of straight and cis folks that are allies that are like, I'm a tenure faculty. You want me to write the email and cuss the president out so you don't lose your job, but I want to make sure your students are handled. So, you know, making sure that like if you're going to do the allyship, you're really doing it. It's not just a face service. It's not just a talk. You know, you're walking that talk, putting your money where your mouth is. If it's not money, putting your resources and your time and your actions to what you're saying that you are.
Wow, absolutely. Yeah, and that kind of hit it, you know, right on, right on. Reverend, how are your thoughts on, you know, performative versus oh, hi,
Yeah.
Queen. Thank you for joining. I'll get to you in just a second, okay? Go
Hi,
ahead,
everybody.
Reverend.
Hi. Well, so I work with like a lot of like progressive white churches. So like it's all, I got a performative allyship out the wazoo. And like for me, when I think about the difference, like I agree completely with Lee that like performative allyship is dangerous. It is dangerous because it gives the illusion of a space that is safe, and then it is not. And like I think that like especially within like for queer folks in faith communities, for trans folks in faith communities, it's like for me part of starting the new space was that I realized after I passed my ordination exams a few years ago, it's like, well, crap, like I can't go anywhere that's already existing and invite the folks that I feel called to create space with. And they're going to be safe because there are so many things that they would have to like go through just even to get into the community, where it's like, it has to be like starting from the get-go, because it's like, it's all of this performative, it's this performative allyship where people like want to have trans people there, but then they don't actually recognize the ways in which the space is completely unsafe for trans people. I mean, and that's things like there was a while back, I was in a church and like a third of their youth group just came out in various ways, right? But there was nowhere for me to pee because they didn't have any gender neutral bathrooms, which is embarrassing in a way, but also like you're going to baptize these kids, but not give them a place to pee. And that to me is performative allyship at its worst, because I also know the impact that has on young people, right? And so it's like, it's dangerous. And so for me, it's like, I've got no time for performative allyship at this point. It's like, I'm not going to do it. I mean, it's like, I'm not going to do it. Like, it's dangerous. It's like, I'm not going to do like the lip service and the whatever. Like, I'm tired of doing trainings where I try to show people that they should care about the full humanity of anybody. I'm just, so for me, I'm like, I mean, for me, it's also like realizing we're in this world at this time, it's complicated. So like, let's sit down and have meals together, you know, or let's sit down and actually build relationships with each other. Because for me, it's like, I'm so tired of watching allies totally drop the ball or like completely not see me as anything other than this trans person who's their go-to whatever. And like, I'm exhausted. So like, I'm going to go hang out with folks and like do my thing and like love and welcome and do, but like, the trans folks I know, it's also like, we're creative, we're clever, we're thoughtful, we're funny. We know what it is to live in our own bodies in ways that are like for me, I don't know about y'all have this, but like talking to folks a lot of times, it's like, oh, y'all haven't been doing the same work I've been doing because you've been telling me all my life something's wrong with me. So I'm doing all my internal work, meditation, breathing, claiming home in my body, starting testosterone, all those things. And then I go back and it's like, oh, y'all really didn't know what you were doing. Because now I'm finding my center and like clear about who I am and where I am. And like other folks are like, oh, but now what do we do? Because it's like, they don't know what to do with like a happy queer person. You know, it's like, so for me, I think it's like, show up and do the work for yourself. But like, I think it's like, I'm tired of being everybody's excuse not to do the work. And I think for me, it's like, if you want to be here, but otherwise like, I don't know. And that sounds so cynical. I'm much more hopeful than that, but like, it feels like the world is full of performative allyship right now. And like, yeah, just have some courage.
Absolutely. We hear you. And Mark, I'd be interested, and then Queen, I'll have you follow Mark. I'd be interested in hearing, you know, operating a large march, right? And dealing with the nonprofit world as you do, what is your take on performative?
Well, I think that Reverend just hit it on the nail. I think one of the things we have to realize is that when we are in that mode of performative, we're dealing with lives. And I think that's sometimes missed. And if we're only in the performative mode, we're minimalizing the community. And so this is where I think it harkens for me back to my education background as a teacher and as a college professor. I was never in that mode of performative. In fact, I hated that both in myself and in my students. And I think that carried me in the nonprofit world. And as I look at the community, and as I look at the march, as we've developed the march over time, that's the one thing that we've been intentional about, is it's not just about the march, people just showing up for that one event or allies showing up for that one event. There's a series of programs, there's a series of initiatives, there's a series of action steps that are moving us through the process and through an experience. And so, I don't think performative has a place. And I just go back to that statement that I think we have to understand that we are dealing with lives, and creating those safe spaces, as Reverend Jess talked about, I think is just critical and is so important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Queen Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. And folks, I want you to understand how dedicated your panelists are. Queen is joining us literally right from the airport. Didn't want to miss this because that's how it is. And seriously, I really want to thank you because this is a strong topic. And it's great that no matter what space you're in, you're saying, I'm going to show up and I'm going to be here to be able to answer these questions. So if you don't mind, can you please give us your pronouns, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll go ahead and reprompt you for the question to answer to remind you, okay?
Hello, everyone. I'm Queen Victoria Ortega. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I just want to thank everyone for having the grace to allow me to be on the panel. And I'm here, and I'm glad to be able to join. And yeah, it is important. It's an important conversation that is happening, and I did not want to miss it for sure.
Absolutely. So the question that we were just discussing was, telling us how, with your experience and what you do in the community, all the panelists were talking about how performative allyship is it's an unsafe spot to be. Could we hear your thoughts on performative allyship within either what you do or the spaces that you navigate?
Most definitely. I think that, one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that performative allyship can actually be very profitable, right? And very beneficial to the people who are performing it. So those who are paying for the dance need to also be called into accountability that you are benefiting from that performative allyship, and we have to be able to call that out and say, like, hey, are you paying for just a little dance here, or is it translating to something tangible, right? And part of that tangibility can be, bringing trans masculine individuals into the space and being able to shut the hell up. Even that simple act of being able to say, okay, part of my allyship is giving up the mic. And it's so difficult to do, especially in an age where there's so much reward, whether it comes in the form of a like button or whether it comes in the form of a followship. It also comes in the form of economics. So I think that that's the other conversation to have, is like, people have this perception that if I do leave performative allyship behind, even though we might be conscious of it, that I'm going to lose out on some coin, on some money. And the reality is that if we approach it from abundance and actually help each other, we actually could create more for our community. So that's, I think, is an easier way to, not an easier way, but a more realistic way to look at, is that if we are able to create abundance for each other, then we don't have to do the little dance. We don't have to, be performative in that process. We could just be, because that's where our strength lies as trans and non-binary people, is being able to live in our truth. So we just got to go back to where we started, back to the root of who we are. Is just be honest.
Thank you for that, Queen Victoria. Again, we really appreciate you popping in, directly from the airport. Safe travels, of course, as you are staying on, on the call as we do this. 2 a.m. I want to hear from you for sure. I would let me know. What are your thoughts on this question?
Oh man, it's a difficult question because I face it a lot. From having to deal with a marketing standpoint. So unfortunately, I firsthand have to be the person in the room, like a fly on the wall, watching them force performative allyship all day long and being the one person trying to explain why this is not correct. I understand and definitely agree with Queen with how performative can be profitable for certain people. But I don't agree with it. I agree with seeing active change. I agree with seeing tangible change. And that's just in my firm opinion. As far as how that needs to be implemented, making money in your pocket from having a trans person in your space or saying that you're going to do something for the trans community to make your organization look good, but it's something that's not actually impactful. Like the Reverend said, you're going to baptize us, but we can't pee. You know what I mean? You want to take our picture, but we can't even own the frame. That's not acceptable in my opinion. Like if these organizations really want to truly make the impact that they want to have by buying us, which that's what I think performance is. I think that it's more of a buying the cosign of the trans community versus earning the cosign of the trans community through efforts. Okay. We can't be bought personally. So if they really want to have that, they have to start implementing things. And on top of that, us, as far as how we can change that, we have to be willing to say no. The reason why a lot of people within the trans community aren't able to get the type of allyship we deserve is because some of us are willing to take performative for the check. A lot of us are willing to, let's be real. We don't really get a lot of funding. We don't really get a lot of nonprofit organizations geared towards us. So some trans people will sell their own self-respect for the check of being able to say, here's a little bit of funding for my group. Here's a little bit of funding for my community, but I'm going to waver on who I am. I'm going to waver on what makes me comfortable. We can't do that. We can't do that, and we can't be afraid to go into these rooms and say, listen, if you really and truly want my organization, you really and truly want my students, you really and truly want my clients, this is what they're needing. And not just giving words with this action, with this plan, actions. So if their game plan says we're going to baptize them, well, can we get some co-ed clothes to put in when we get dipped in the water? Can we get a unisex changing room? Simple things like that. Simple, it's offering a solution before we take the check.
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much for that input. And folks, you can see that all the panelists, as they responded to this question, you can feel, right? You can feel what they're saying. You can feel these words. There is emotion that is attached to what they are saying. They are speaking truth. Lee, you wanted to add a little bit more. What would you like to add?
So I'm going to do a quick call in right quick because while, yes, on this panel, we're addressing allyship and speaking to folks not in our community, but I do think it's important to do a call in for allyship within our own community. And so I'm going to speak to my own experience as a trans man. As trans men, we have to have allyship with trans men that don't show up or aesthetically or socioeconomically like ourselves. So as an older trans guy, I remember when I was coming into the transition, it was you're going to be a man this one way. But I meet younger trans men and trans masculine folks that do it their way, right? So we have to make space for them to come into their identity, because I think the thing sometimes that we forget is that there is a power in getting to name and claim yourself for yourself. And how you're authentic in the world. And I do feel like a lot of young trans folks get robbed of that because we know with power and oppression and things like that, the cis heteronormativity comes into our community as well. And we have those different expectations on it. Also too, doing a call in for my trans sisters and trans femme folks, right? We know that we have sometimes, as much love as it is, sometimes we have some interesting dynamics that come into play between the two of us, and we need to do a better job at showing up for each other around different issues and things. So definitely want to do that calling for our community as trans people, and then to the other letters of the acronym for my lesbian and gay folks. Like, you know, as a trans man, I'm often in situations where gay cis men fetishize the hell out of me. That's cool that you're like, hey, daddy. Okay, but we had an educational conference, so please call me by my name. If you can't call me by my name, don't call me anything at all. So just making sure that allyship also is amongst our community, because if we want folks that's not in our community to have allyship, we first got to have allyship with each other across the diversity of experience and identities and things of that sort. So that's all I wanted to add on that.
And I'm so glad that you did. Yes.
So just to add something, I think that 2 a.m. said, and the word was a little bit of funding. And I think the performative, what I see is a lot of times in the performative, you're talking about from a nonprofit and from a sponsor perspective, a handout. You're not talking about something substantial. And I think one of the mistakes that I've seen in the community is thinking that things are a handout, rather than thinking that as a trans community, you are a consumer, you're part of the brand. And I think the more that the community can tie in and understand and communicate to the sponsors and to that brand how they fit in, then you move from that performative to the substantial. And the money will flow even more so than what we see in the performative mode. So I say that because I've watched over the last 3 years, and I think this is a transition that a lot of nonprofits make and a lot of communities make, is they think, oh, well, let's get this group or this corporation or this sponsor just to give us a little bit of money. And the danger in that is that money will only be there a short period of time, versus if you get into the mode of what is the community about, how do we fit into that brand, and showing them that you're a powerful consumer in that brand. And I know that's a little bit on the sponsorship, the corporate side, but I think it fit in with what 2 a.m. was talking about with that, you know, the little bit of funds, because I have watched the community fight over very small dollars. And I think one of the things that has to happen moving forward is those dollars have to grow. And they're not going to grow in the performative. They're just not.
Absolutely. And again, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Lee, for both of your comments and adding that in, because it is very important. And I myself, I see that from being a public figure, like I said, and all of that. I've experienced a lot of the things that you all are talking about, and the importance of what you both were saying. So thank you for adding that. And again, folks, you see that the call to action is very important. And dealing with allyship and what that call to action is going to be and how it's going to look. And again, I want to remind everyone that is watching and viewing on Facebook, YouTube, please share, share. We still have more questions. And speaking of questions, you can go ahead and drop your questions in the comment section, and we will go through and filter them. Again, this is a safe space, so if you do want to remain anonymous in your question, please say that. And the folks that are behind the screen doing all our tech will make sure that we keep your question anonymous, but it'll get to the panelists here, and we'll be able to ask those questions as we get a little bit later on in the conversation. And again, don't forget about that brunch. Again, I'm still sitting here trying to figure out how I'm going to make my way, because mimosas and brunch sound real good. That's happening on November 21st, the Black Trans Joy Brunch in DC. So again, the link is there. Make sure you click it. And I am just so excited to try to figure out how I'm going to get there. Y'all know I probably ain't going to make it there, but I don't know. Lee, you might have to put me on the screen or something so I can be there virtually. You know, that's not abnormal anymore now that we've had these COVID years. It is not abnormal to walk in with your phone, right, and have somebody just on the screen waving at people saying hi. So again, thanks, Bonds. Thanks for all the sponsors and everything that have been helping us out. And was able to have us have this panel and this series of events that have been going on throughout the week. So I'm going to go ahead and move along to our next question here. This question is a little bit on the easier side. That last one was a little bit tough, got us in our emotions a little bit, but that's what we want. That's what the people want to hear. So what role do you think privilege plays in allyship? What role do you think privilege plays in allyship? Now, I'm trying to see. Oh, Reverend, was that a hand? Okay, guys, I was going to say who I want to pick on, but Reverend, go ahead because
No,
I'm
I got,
sure you got something.
yeah. So for me, so I'm a white trans person, non-binary person, right? So I'm sort of like at this sort of intersections, right? And like, for me, like actually, so as I'm starting this new church, and the person I'm partnering with is 28, I'm 42, so there's an age difference, but like also Black queer man, and who, like, I'd say maybe agender, but like assigned male and more, and is comfortable with pronoun, and like, you know, and recognizes his own sort of space within that. And as we're talking, right, we're talking about this stuff, and it's like, just name the thing, right? It's like, just name the thing, I think, for a big part, where for me as a white person, and name the thing on your own, right, with other white people, right, with other folks who share that element of privilege you share, so that when you're in conversation, I think it's like we're taught so much, I think, for me as a white person, but I think for any around our area of privilege, we're taught not to acknowledge it in whatever way. And so it's like, why? You know, it's like, so then naming that thing. And I think we're taught not to acknowledge it because that's how the system's upheld. And that's a whole bigger conversation. And ultimately the system's a whole hot mess. And that's a bigger conversation. But for the thing, it's like naming that we exist within these spaces that are complicated, and that like, and so for me, I think around privilege, it's like I know for me, my experience of, if we talk about within this nation at this time, gender and race being these two, you know, created categories that have very real impacts because of the weight that society has put on them in different ways. And I will say that for me, I do feel like that race is bigger in that, and my own experience of lived, I mean, like for me, when I go from like in my own, like having the experience of being read as female to being read as male, like most of my, like one of my best friends was talking about this, a person who identifies as non-binary and Black, articulated, they were like, you know, I'm going from being an object to a threat. And like, for me, that's not my experience. And like, so it's naming those things in a way that isn't woe is me or woe is you, because that's also BS, right? Of like, because for me, when I'm able to name the privilege in a way that isn't around like giving it up and all the, I think it's like using it. It's like, there's an area where like learning how to speak within various spaces. But for me, I get real leery when people are like, I'm going to use my privilege to do X, Y, or Z, because that implies that my privilege is still something that I'm going to continue to take advantage of. And if I'm going to do it in one way, I'm going to do it in another. And so for me, if like I'm going to use my privilege to get into spaces, then like what that means to me is that I'm going to use my privilege to get into that space. And then most of the time, what happens when you're in that space is you forget. So for me, it's like when I'm thinking about like privilege, like as we're starting the new church, right, from the get-go, everything is 50-50 in terms of how we're paid, in terms of how we function. And it's like, and everything is above the board. Like we talk about all of the things. So it's like, we want to live in right relationship with each other. So in terms of that, it means for me, it's recognizing that like privilege is something that society put and that I have access to. But so for me, it's like, what that means is like, I'm going to pay for things right now because I have access to different resources as we're working to get to a place where we're both being paid. So it's like, I think it's like figuring out how to navigate that. But I think first of all, it's like naming it and talking about it, like talking about how do we function within this space, because otherwise it just becomes this invisible thing in a room. Or even more, this thing, like if I'm so stuck and feeling ashamed about my whiteness, then I'm not going to show up as an ally. I'm also not going to show up in my full self. So it's like, ultimately, it's like recognizing how privilege plays a part. I think listening to people who don't carry the same privilege in whatever space you have, and being in relationship with them so that you know that like they trust you enough that like when you listen, they know that you're hearing, right? So it's like then acting based on what you hear, you know, and how I can put, then that means for me, sometimes I'm in uncomfortable spots because I'm going to have to speak out to the white person who said the stupid thing. But I would far rather do that than have my friend who's not white hurting, you know? So it's like weighing it. And that I think for me also realizing as a white person, again, that like white person is like white supremacy teaches me that I'm powerless. Like that's how it keeps me so seduced. It teaches me that in order to function, I have to be tied to these systems of whatever that capitalism, all the things. So then it teaches me I don't have power. So for me, sometimes just saying to the other white person, like, I was really horrified by the way you just spoke of this, in a way that like is direct, and in a way that like it's uncomfortable and awkward, because I was taught in my white self not to speak out. And I was taught, and that was reinforced pretty fiercely. So that's why it's scary. So for me, it's recognizing that and the trauma of what it is to live in a white body and how we're socializing that its own way. So for me, it's like just naming it, and like naming that like there's certain areas where I'm going to pass in particular ways and different things be read, and that's going to allow something, and other times when it's not. But I think it's like, for me, it's a lot easier to ask for help from others if I'm also able to claim my own privilege in those spaces, because it keeps me grounded too. It keeps me recognizing the human underneath all of the privilege or the lack of privilege, you know, because those are all blankets. So for me, it like allows me to connect with my brother, sister, or sibling in a way that's at the human level, rather than trying to navigate through all the BS of like all the world. So I think about this a whole lot. So especially in the church, but that's a whole other conversation.
Nice, nice. Thank you so much. And you saw some folks saying like they never thought about it that way and things like that. So thank you so much, Reverend, for sharing that. Queen, I would love to hear from you, especially if it is okay. If you do have too much background noise, we can go ahead and I'll go to you 2 a.m. But go ahead, Queen, if you could give your input on privileges and allyship.
Well, I think that I would add that privilege is a discussion that we need to have among community, because also some of us might have access to the lexicon and the language of what that would look like. But for some of us that, for example, are allies within other communities that are oppressed and marginalized, and we don't have the language, it might come across like, I'm like, what is that shit? Like, how do I get down with that? Like, what does it mean? Right? What does that mean in the hood? Like, where I think that I might not be privileged in certain spaces, however I am. And what is the responsibility that comes with that? And how it doesn't mean you get to walk around getting butt hurt because you too are walking around with trauma, right? And how do you trust in that privilege, in being able to say, hey, you know, how do I use the seat that I have or the access that I have, pass it along, not just sitting in our feelings. So I think that those are important discussions to have of how we're going to translate that conversation of privilege to even within our own communities where we might not be able to show up. Like as a Latina trans woman, there's a certain spaces where, you know, I'm considered marginalized, but then I might have access to being able to bring my other communities with me. And I have to be kept accountable as well.
Thank you so much, Queen. And it's funny because you actually led me right into what I was wanting to prompt 2 a.m. And asking. And, you know, 2 a.m. being in the music industry, you know, thinking of like hip hop and R&B, how it is predominantly, you know, for the Black culture, right? We dominate that industry. Now, coming in as a Black trans masculine person, right, there might be some privileges that are taking place as a hip hop or R&B artist coming in versus a white trans masculine artist. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that whether you're Black or whether you're white, if you're trans, we all kind of get the same pick of the bucket in entertainment and in hip hop. Now, passability is what gives you privilege. You actually touched on it jokingly earlier when you mentioned some people might consider you baby trans. So like me, I'm considered baby trans too. If you want to been transitioning for a certain amount of time, you don't have a certain amount of facial hair, you don't have a certain amount of this, you don't have a certain amount of that. Within your own trans community, you won't have any privilege, right? But then in a heterosexual world, you might have a different type of level of it. So I think when it comes to privilege in ourselves, we definitely, Queen hit it on the head. We have to get an understanding of what that looks like within our community. But that also circles back to we have to get a better understanding of each other within our community. Personally, I may not get as much privilege when I'm in my own community. Like if I'm surrounded by a bunch of other trans guys, I might not be looked at somebody as privileged, right? But then in an entertainment space, I am because of how passable I am. I get told all the time that people have no clue, right? So for a person who may be trans or may be non-binary, may be a trans woman, it does make a difference. I get told all the time that I'm accepted because I'm a trans man, but if I was a trans woman, it wouldn't be accepted. Well, why? You know what I mean? So when we ask the questions of what does your privilege now give you the right to do? Well, now as a person with privilege in their space, now I got to pick their brains and know why. Why am I safe in this space because of what I look like, but another brother wouldn't be, or a sister wouldn't be? Why? So the responsibility of a person once you realize you have privilege is not to use it for your own good and your own high horse. Your duty when you have that privilege is figure out how I can make sure those who may have been gate kept out can get in. Figure out how I can use this to make sure those who might not be understood are understood. That's what that privilege comes with. So that's what I do in the entertainment space. I'm the person who can sit behind the room, sit behind the board with all these labels, all these management, all these execs. And when they're coming up with these marketing, they're coming up with these music, and they're coming up with these strategies to try to force their queerness and their transness or their blackness away from them, or to just use it as a selling point. I get to be that person that comes in and says, nah, let's step back. Instead of trying to make this person's truth something that y'all use as for profit and throw them in the corner and they have all this trauma, let's sit down. Let's figure out how to turn this person's niche, which is the fact that they're different, and figure out how to impact the whole demographic.
Absolutely. Lee?
So for me, keep it short and simple. My students on campus will tell you all the time when I do training, I say everyone has some type of privilege, everyone has some type of oppression. So you use your privilege to dismantle systems of oppression. And so my example always that I give is like, I have male privilege. And so what does that look like for me? You know, sitting on different hiring committees and asking like, when are y'all bringing in some trans femme folks? When are y'all bringing in some trans masculine folks? When are y'all bringing in non-binary folks? Because it can't just be like the trans guy with the passing privilege is the only person y'all are bringing into the hiring realm. But I do want to say to like fellow trans men and trans masculine folks, because passing privilege is something like for real in our community, right? That opens up a lot of gates around stability, whether it be, you know, economic with careers, education, and things like that. But be okay lighting other candles. I think it's an African proverb that's like a candle doesn't lose light by lighting another candle. Be okay to light the candles of some of these younger guys or people that don't have that type of passing privilege. Be okay to let them be in your circle. Be okay to pour into them. Just be okay with that experience. And I know like, it's like, whoa, if I have so much oppression, like how can I even use privilege? But just owning it and being okay that you have a privilege at the same time that you have an oppression, and just, you know, dismantling those systems of oppression, which you can. I feel like if everybody chips away at a piece of it, eventually sometime it'll go away. I would like to believe that we'll, you know, live in a future like Star Trek with like no type of issues around gender, race, or money. It can happen.
Absolutely. Mark, what would you like to add about privileges and allyship?
Yeah, I think the key is, and I think we've talked about keywords like acknowledge, responsibility, trust, and I would say educate. And I just when you have that privilege and the door opens, I think it is your job, first of all, I think as Reverend Jess said, to acknowledge that you have it. And I think too often that doesn't happen. And I think once you acknowledge it, then you've got to bring the folks in the room that need to be in the room. And sometimes when you bring them in the room, you've got to educate because people don't understand. And so I think that's a key role. And I think I think Queen Victoria used the word trust. And I just think that's critical, that as you have that privilege and you open doors, that you create that trust within the room or within the situation or within that experience.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I thought I was still muted there. And so we're getting close to time here, but I want to hit on this last question here. If each of you, and I'll go through just quickly and briefly, pick one or two things that allies can do to educate themselves. Okay. Again, we're getting close on time, and I want to leave time for the audience to go ahead and give us questions. So one or two things that allies can do to educate themselves. Queen, I'll go ahead and start with you.
I always say that if you allow yourself to love a community, if you allow yourself to love yourself as well, to give yourself the opportunity to learn, that is the key ingredient to me. If you do that, you're able then to put in the research, put in the time, and even check yourself. So that's where I will say my piece.
Reverend, do you have one or two things that allies can do to educate themselves?
Honestly, I would echo that. I mean, I would say like lean into like the uncertainty and like know that, especially if you have people, you know, coming out, young people, whatever, just especially in the church, it's like just trust that it's not really about where you're going to end up, but that it really is about just being present with them as they go and listen and then respond. Yeah.
Absolutely. 2 a.m. Ricky.
Yeah, I definitely just want to follow up with everything they're saying. I always tell people when I have to encounter them or clients who have to encounter me who come from a different demographic who don't understand trans people that if you can accept your truth and not fear your own truth, you won't have to fear mine. If you can love yourself and love your own, you won't have to. You can love me. So I think when it comes to allyship, is that like Queen said, accept that you're going to be loving a different type of community. But in doing that, understand that they're just as much as we want your acceptance and we want you to understand us, it's vice versa. I think another thing as far as tangible things that allies can do, um, we all know that there's safe zone training, but outside of safe zone training, start really creating organic safe spaces. And when I say organic safe spaces, meaning don't just label it as safe, truly make this a true safe space that people can come, they can be open, and they can learn and they can love. And then if you do that, then everything can flow.
Mark, what are one or two things allies can do to educate themselves?
Yeah, I think two things I would say is one, I just think listen. I think that's just critical to listen. And then the second thing I would say is challenge yourself as an ally to move into a space that you've not been in before. And I just think as Reverend Jess said, lean into that uncertainty and love. And I think that's just critical. So that's two things I would say.
Thank you so much. And audience, again, remember you can go ahead and drop your questions. We're going to get to you momentarily. Lee, I would love to hear what you have to say. What are some things that allies can do to educate themselves?
Yeah, definitely agree with everything each panelist has said. One thing I always tell folks is diversify your resources of the things you take in. So like books, the media you listen to, the channels that you watch. There are enough trans artists, authors, and news articles written about trans people. So diversify those resources. And in addition to that, like take advantage of those self-education moments, especially like since the pandemic, we have had so many virtual things. So like Safe Zone is a free resource on its site. They have this really cool activity called Privilege for Sale that talks about like trans identities and LGBTQ identities that I think is a very great resource. In addition to on the first night, we had J. Mace III. J. Mace III has put out some really good books, y'all. There's this really good book he did called White People Be Tripping. Don't let the title scare you, but it talks about like privilege and things that he has experienced working in different nonprofits, implicit bias, microaggressions, transphobia. So like just tapping into those resources. There are some really good resources out there.
Thank you so much for. Oh, Reverend, did you have something else you needed to add? I seen your hand.
Yeah, I just had kind of an anecdote. And one thing, so I do a lot of stuff in faith spaces and church spaces, and my own context is within Christian sort of tradition or history. And one thing we run into a lot is that people feel like they can't actually like have both scripture and like love trans or queer people. And it's just fundamentally untrue. I think just naming that, I think like that there's no contradiction between being queer and being like beloved by God, that there's like, I think, but also not shying away from scripture. So if I may, just for one moment, like one of the stories that I talk about a lot is the story of the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts 8, and it's a powerful story because this person. They were both an outsider, and throughout Scripture because of their national identity and their gender identity, and yet there's this really powerful interaction between the eunuch and between Philip, where the eunuch is baptized and then carries the message of the gospel internationally, and is celebrated, like goes away joyfully dancing, right? And what I love about the story is that this eunuch knows, despite like all of the sort of noise, that they are beloved, and that they claim that. And there's never a time in the story when Philip says to the eunuch that they need to not be a eunuch. There's never a time in the story when it even comes up. In fact, the only time it comes up in our stories, and the reason that it's at the heading, is because it was a big deal, because like the whole message was that everybody actually, this is something that's within all of us, and that it's often the people who society doesn't quite have room for, who embody the most holy of sort of like what it is to be in our bodies, like even just to claim the complexity of masculine and feminine within ourselves. So I think for me, just as a faith person, and somebody especially who realizes the ways that the church has been so harmful for us, and like even in our disembodiment, that like the church has done so much, I think as trans folks who've asked those questions around how to really be in our bodies, I think just as a faith person in the space, I want to just name that that's actually like a really sacred thing. And that like, I would love, for me, when I think about like, I'm so tired of like acceptance, like I want celebration. I want people to come out and to be celebrated. I want it to be like, amen, you know who you are, right? In this way that like we claim who we are, as because I know for me, as I've learned how to be in my body in the ways that being trans has invited me to do, I feel more alive in my body. I'm like, I've gotten all into crystals and healing. I mean, all this stuff in a way that like I'm alive more. I am literally alive more aware of my aliveness. And that is because of I sing more. And like I was saying yesterday, there's nothing more beautiful as a testament to resurrection than hearing a trans person sing. And I don't care if you're on hormones or not. I think singing when your voice, like, so I think it's like claim that. Like I'm tired of being the sad queer for somebody, and it's like, and I'm in Virginia, and like who knows what's happening with this state and whatever. It's a hot mess. It is going to always be a hot mess because it's all a ruse anyway. So for me, I'm like, I think I'm just like, I just want to affirm claiming the belovedness of your trans self, and that like, and knowing, and I think for allies especially, stop trying to put trans people into this box, because that box doesn't fit you. It doesn't fit me. It doesn't fit anybody. So like get rid of the box, because we keep talking about inviting people to these tables without pausing to wonder if these were the same damn tables that Jesus turned over. So like for me, I'm like, we're going to make a new table, because this table wasn't, that table was like, and we could talk church history sometime, but like that table is not the table. Like, and so for me, I'm like, I think I just want to affirm that, and that like into my bones. And like, I think as a faith person, it's like, there's never a time in scripture when it's all noise. Anybody who said that like, you can't be trans, you can't be like beloved, is that is noise. So I think for me, like for whatever allies, it's like, if you don't know that you can absolutely celebrate the beauty that is a trans person, then don't call yourself an ally. I mean, if you want to take it seriously, and that's not to oversimplify, but like, I'm done. Like I saw less than a month ago, a young person in this city die by suicide. The donations went to Side by Side. I'm done. Like I'm done. I don't want donations to go to Side by Side for a young person. And not to mention all the other things, but it's like, I think it's like just do the work yourselves. Like you can. For all that, I think the non-trans allies, I would say that you too can learn to love your full self. So I think it's like just watching that, like trans joy is beautiful. And I think that for me, like, that's where I want to like tune my gauge to, right? It's like, I want the joy. I want to learn. I know what it is to be in my body, and like, I want to live in it. And so for me, it's like giving ourselves permission to like turn down the noise when we need to, because it's just noise. And like, I think, yeah, that's my little sermon. And I think it's like, just, we're beautiful, y'all. It's beautiful. And I think for me, it's like, I'm tired of like trying to convince people that I have the right to exist. my beloved self has been here this whole time. And like, I was like, and that's all of us, So I think, and listen to young people for goodness sakes. Like, and not in a way that like tokenizes them, but actually take them seriously. Because we know who we are. And so I think it's like before the world beats that out of us. So that's the end of my TED Talk. I will back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend, for those words, and it leads me right into my last little snippet here. Before we turn it back over to Lee, panelists, do you have any other calls of actions or takeaways that you would like our audience to hear about strengthening allyships, either within the community, within their place of employment, whether it's at home? Is there anything you would like to add in these last few minutes, again, before we turn it back over to Lee?
I just want to touch back on something that Lee touched on earlier, which is just allyship within the community itself. Shameless plug, make sure y'all pull up to the brunch on Sunday. I'm performing. Come get your tickets. Get drunk at Mimosa and brunch. But when it comes to overall, I think that if we can form more allyship within our community, there's so many trans leaders that are unseen doing things like what Lee is gearheading. There are way more trans recording artists and models like myself and you know what I'm saying? There's way more representation than we give each other credit for, right? And if we continue to base the credit that we give each other on passability, on who do I see you with, on social medias, on how does your truth veer from my truth, we're never going to go anywhere. So I think that the best thing that we can do is genuinely start supporting each other. Start reposting other trans creatives just as much as you post the cis creators who are famous. Start supporting trans and non-binary organizations just as much as you donate to some of these other ones. Start giving our own people the spotlight, and when we give our own people the spotlight and respect that we deserve, we'll get it from everyone else.
Anyone else would like to add? Real briefly, we got about 2 minutes left before I turn it over to Lee. Any key takeaways, call to actions you'd like to leave with our audience? Wonderful. Well, Lee, it's all on you. Thank you so much, everybody, for allowing me the time to moderate. I mean, again, I learned so much from each one of these panelists. I'm filled with joy. I have been, virtual for a long time, and I haven't been able to do these in-person things. And so getting something every now and then like this, it just fills my glass back up of advocacy work. I'm pumped. I'm ready to go back out there. Thank you all for joining us. And I'm going to hand it back over to Ely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dezjorn, for moderating tonight, and to all of our panelists. We truly, appreciate the gems that you have dropped to the community. I want to thank each and every one of you for viewing and engaging with us tonight, watching this panel. Definitely want to give a thanks to our sponsors, the Student Center for Equity and Inclusion in LGBTQ Campus Life at the University of Richmond, the Black Trans Fund, Flux AHF, Gilead Sciences, the National Trans Visibility March, Human Rights Campaign Alabama, the Virginia Anti-Violence Project, Diversity Richmond, and Nations Foundation. Without these sponsors, we wouldn't have been able to bring you this week, and so we're just so thankful to them. Now, 9 o'clock, people, we are having the misogyny and misandry conversation, okay? We talking about misogyny and misandry, not only that happens in the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, but also how cis heteronormativity affects as well. So we're going to have a conversation about how we act as a community with each other and how folks act towards us. It's going to be a really good conversation. This is the After Dark conversation. So please join us at 9 o'clock. And T, I'll let you go ahead and take us out, baby. My song is coming. I'm just waiting on it. we might be having some technical difficulties.
That's what I'm thinking, but no worries. Again, we want to thank everybody for being here. Thank you so much. Oh, T, do we got you? We trying to get our music so we can exit.
Well, you still on mute?
No, we cannot hear you.
On mute.
See, folks, this is what COVID had led us to. Our technology, and we all trying to do what we can do, but it's all right. You know, it happens to the best of us. Even with the best technology backing us, we still get knocked. So no worries.
Well, that's all right. Well, everybody go look up 2 a.m. Ricky. He's on Spotify, Tidal, all Google Music, Apple Music, all of that. So go look him up. He has some really great songs. And we'll see y'all back at 9 o'clock.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all, and have a great rest of your evening or afternoon, depending on where you are.